Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take complex research, break it down, and rebuild it so you walk away understanding it fast. Today we're looking at something pretty ambitious. Mapping the functional blueprint, really, of an entire continent. Plant ecology breakthroughs that give us a critical shortcut. Think conservation, climate modeling, even predicting wildfire fuel loads. Stuff that really matters.
That's right. We're diving into a key paper here published in Global Ecology and Biogeography. It's titled Mapping Plant Functional Traits Using Gap-Filled Datasets to Inform Management and Modeling. Lead author Samuel C. Andrew. And this 2025 research is a fantastic example of how large-scale data synthesis is really changing the game in ecology.
Okay, let's unpack this straight away. Why should listeners care about mapping plant functional traits? What's the core mission here? What makes it critical?
Well, the core idea is utility. Plant functional traits, these measurable things like leaf size, plant height, leaf toughness, they're like the architectural blueprints for an ecosystem. If you understand those traits, you can start predicting how the whole system works. Things like carbon storage, nutrient cycling, and yeah, absolutely, how much fuel is available for fire.
So the underlying idea they're testing is if you know the plant's functional design, you can pretty much predict how the landscape behaves.
Exactly. But here's the huge challenge. Globally, the scale of plant diversity is just immense. We need maps, spatial coverage of these key traits for modeling, for management, but actually collecting field data for, hundreds of thousands of species. It's logistically, financially just impossible time-wise. This paper really aims to show that we don't actually need perfect, complete field data to get reliable, useful patterns at that continental scale.
Okay.
And to grasp the problem, you have to understand these major data shortfalls in plant ecology.
Ah, the infamous shortfalls, right? Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. So think of it like this. First, there's the what problem. That's the Ronchieren shortfall. We might know a plant exists, but we don't know its functional traits. No idea about its leaf area or seed size.
We've got the name, but not its life strategy. Got it.
Precisely. Then there's the Wallachine shortfall, which is the where. We don't even know its exact distribution. Where does it actually grow? This study zeroes in on native Australian plants. We're talking about globally maybe 340,000 known plant species, capturing all that data in the field. Yeah. Millions of observations needed. So the researchers really leaned on existing regional efforts, particularly the Austrates database, to start plugging those gaps.
That makes total sense. Trying to measure everything in the field for all species, it's just way too far off, which explains why estimating the missing bits, this gap filling, isn't just helpful. It's become pretty standard practice in ecology now. Necessary, really.
And they focused on 4 key functional traits. Together, these capture the main trade-offs in how a plant survives. First up, maximum height. Pretty straightforward. It reflects competitive ability, mostly for light.
Right, the classic race to the top. What else?
Second, seed mass. This tells you about maternal investment. Big seeds give seedlings a good start, less reliance on immediate resources. But they don't tend to travel as far. It's a colonization trade-off.
Makes sense. And then leaf area. That links to the plant's energy budget, thermal regulation, things like that. Like big, thin leaves in a hot, dry place might be a problem.
Spot on. And finally, a really crucial one, leaf mass per area, or LMA. Let's call it the Leaf Toughness Index. It's fundamental for understanding resource strategies. Low LMA means cheap, fast-growing, disposable leaves. High LMA means tough, long-lasting, water-saving leaves, essential for stress survival. It's central to the leaf economic spectrum.
Okay, 4 core traits, partial data, over 17,000 species. So the methodology. How do they actually build these massive continental maps, combining estimated traits with where the plants live?
Yeah, that's the sophisticated bit. They combine the gap-filled species-level trait data, the estimates, with stacked species distribution model outputs. This was for 17,251 Australian plant species. Imagine a huge digital overlay. They estimate the trait value for each species, then map that trait across every 10 by 10 kilometer grid cell where that species is likely found.
So not just guesswork. They used advanced stats, predictive modeling, pulling in info about plant relatives, environment, everything they could to fill the blanks. But how good were those estimates, especially for key traits?
That's the critical question, absolutely. The maps are only as reliable as those underlying estimates. They use techniques like Bayesian, mostly, yes. But, and this is a really important nuance we need to flag, the accuracy was noticeably lower for leaf mass per area. The LMA, the leaf toughness, R-squared there was only 0.56.
That tells you something right away about where the data gaps are biggest, doesn't it?
Exactly. So once they had these gridded trait maps showing average values and the variability for each trait in those 10-kilometer squares, they couldn't just, you know, take them on faith. A map needs checking against reality. How did they validate it? They did this crucial validation step, really intensive work. They compared their big map patterns against metrics from a high-resolution field network called OSPlots. That network has data from 747 meticulously documented plant inventory plots spread right across the continent. That's their ground truth comparison.
Right, so the key question they put to the data was, do these massive model-heavy trait maps show predictable changes along Australia's big climate gradients? Temperature, rainfall, MAT and MA. If the maps reflect reality, climate should be the main driver you see at that scale.
And this is where the results get really interesting.
Okay, let's hear it. What did they find? How did the traits hang together, and how strong was that climate link?
The coordination was strong and pretty much exactly what ecological theory would predict.
Yeah.
Average maximum height, seed mass, and leaf area, they were all strongly positively correlated. It points to that good conditions syndrome, where it's warm and wet, plants tend to grow tall, have bigger leaves, and invest in larger seeds. Favorable environments.
And LMA, the leaf toughness index, was the opposite, the odd one out?
Completely.
Yeah.
It fit the trade-off theory perfectly.
Heck.
Average LMA was negatively related to all the other trait averages. You don't typically find tough, stress-tolerant leaves on plants that are going all out for fast growth and big seeds. High LMA is for toughing it out.
Okay, now the climate link. This seems like the headline result that really justifies the whole gap-filling approach. How much of the pattern did climate explain?
This was, well, pretty striking. The biogeographic patterns for most trait averages, and their variability too, were strongly explained by annual precipitation, MAP, and mean annual temperature, MAT, and their interaction. For height, seed mass, and leaf area, the climate models explain between 78% and 92% of the spatial variance.
Whoa, hang on, up to 92%. You're saying climate alone explains almost all the variation in plant structure across a whole continent. Doesn't that seem high? What about soil, local factors?
It is a really high number, and it speaks volumes about the dominance of those broad climate gradients at the continental scale. It suggests that while local factors definitely matter up close in a small plot, once you average over a 10 by 10 kilometer square, the big signals of temperature and rainfall tend to overwhelm a lot of that local noise.
Okay, I see. So what specific patterns emerged?
Well, mirroring expectations, maximum height, seed mass, and leaf area all showed higher average values in the warmer, wetter coastal regions, the high MAP zones. Classic signal of high resource availability.
And LMA did the opposite, presumably.
Correct. LMA values were higher in the semi-arid center of Australia and also in the winter rainfall areas in the southwest, places where plants need those tougher, denser leaves to handle drought. The maps picked up that fundamental pattern really well.
Which leads us nicely to the so what. The fact that these predictive maps lined up so well with the ground truth plot data, that's the core novelty, isn't it? What does this validation really enable?
It's more than just validation. It's really a green light for using these maps. The study's most novel finding, yes, is that the gap-filled trait maps showed similar trait climate trends when compared directly to that detailed OSPlots field data.
That's huge because it tackles that tricky question about spatial scale and trait ecology, right? It suggests these big, broad-scale maps do reliably capture the known patterns we see in detailed field studies, just writ large.
Exactly. It means we can now use these continental maps with much more confidence to support ecosystem dynamics modeling. Think about it. Managers can potentially use these maps now to get a handle on things like wildfire fuel loads or carbon potential across vast areas without waiting decades for potentially unattainable, perfect field data.
And that kind of spatial detail, 10 by 10 kilometers, must be incredibly useful for conservation prioritization too, helping decide where to focus efforts based on functional vulnerability across the continent.
Absolutely. It allows a much more nuanced approach. You can start identifying areas where plant communities might be functionally susceptible to climate change or other threats. It's a significant step up from existing global maps.
How so?
Well, many global efforts operate at much coarser resolutions, maybe 50 by 50 kilometers or even coarser. These Australian maps offer finer spatial and taxonomic detail, which really boosts the accuracy and practical use at a regional level.
Okay, the results sound really strong, but good science always acknowledges limitations. What caveats did the authors raise? Areas for caution or future work?
Yeah, they were clear about a couple of things. One persistent challenge at this broad scale is spatial autocorrelation. Because nearby grid cells tend to have similar climates and share species due to dispersal, it's hard to definitively tease apart whether trait patterns are purely down to climate filtering or if proximity and dispersal history play a bigger role than the models capture.
Right, the correlation isn't causation issue, essentially.
Mm. And we had to come back to that LMA anomaly. Remember the lower prediction accuracy?
Yeah, R squared of 0.56.
Right. The original data coverage for LMA was the lowest. Only 17% of species had actual measurements. So the prediction models inevitably struggled most, where the real field data was sparsest.
Meaning that in those really remote arid zones like Central Australia, the gap filling might actually be underestimating how tough those desert plant leaves really are, because we just haven't measured enough of them.
That seems to be exactly the case. They pointed out that when they mapped LMA using only the measured data, no gap filling, they saw much higher LMA values in those remote arid areas. It sends a clear message for future fieldwork. We really need better on-the-ground data, especially LMA measurements, from those data-poor arid zones to refine the maps further.
Okay. And what about the scale mismatch when comparing the big maps to the small OS plots? You mentioned the plot level models weren't as strong.
Yeah, the authors suggest that's likely just down to the difference in scale. The 10-kilometer climate data is great for broad patterns, but it smooths over the fine-scale reality within a plot. It doesn't capture the microclimate, the shady side of a hill, a damp patch, or the very local plant-to-plant interactions that shape the community in that tiny area. Plot-level reality is just inherently messier than the grid average.
That makes a lot of sense. So, looking ahead, future directions, what's the next big step for this kind of trait mapping?
Well, the authors suggest a key evolution will be moving beyond just mapping the average trait value for a species. The next frontier is really trying to estimate and model interspecific trait variation. That means understanding how traits within a single species change across different environments. Capturing that variability would add another layer of realism and precision, especially for management applications.
Right. So let's wrap this up. What's the big takeaway here? It feels pretty powerful. It seems to be that we don't necessarily need complete, perfect field data everywhere to see the big picture. These gap-filled trait maps, when done carefully, can capture reliable, broad patterns of how plant function relates to climate across a continent. A valid shortcut for big-scale questions.
I think that's a fair summary. They're a cost-effective tool for broad applications in this era of big data synthesis. But there's a final thought, maybe something for you, the listener, to ponder. While the maps strongly confirm that average community traits change predictably with climate, the paper also highlights that the variance within any given community is often really high. Lots of different strategies coexisting locally. So it raises an interesting question. Are these broad-scale trait metrics maybe better at telling us about the fundamental functional differences between major environments? Why the desert is different from the rainforest, rather than being perfect predictors of every single plant strategy within one specific complex local spot? Something to think about.